We were sent to Siberia to find a missing battalion. What we found buried beneath the ice wasn't supposed to be found, let alone survive. It wasn't just the cold that killed them. Something darker was waiting in that frozen hell, something that still haunts me. I wish I could say I didn't know what was coming, but we should never been there in the first place. The briefing we got, it didn't make sense at the time, but it does now. I wasn't supposed to talk about this mission. Our orders were simple, but nothing about that night was normal. I was a lieutenant in the 4th Special Operations Brigade, stationed in Russia, back in the winter of 2010. We were deployed to a remote section of Siberia, a place no one really talked about and even fewer returned from. The mission was straightforward: locate and retrieve a lost battalion. They'd been stationed in an outpost near Lake Baikal, an isolated area known for its brutal winters and, well, for things best left unsaid. No one had heard from them for weeks. The radio silence was deafening. We were briefed in a small, dimly lit room on base. Nothing extraordinary. Just a simple map of the region, the mission parameters, and a list of standard gear. But there was something off about the way our commanding officer spoke. It wasn't fear, but more like caution, like he was trying to hide something he wasn't supposed to share. He said we'd be entering cold terrain, a little too cold, he muttered under his breath. And we were to expect minimal resistance, which, as you know, is never a good sign. We were equipped for a harsh environment, standard issue cold weather gear, rifles, night vision optics, and a few emergency beacons in case things went south. Everything was standard, everything was normal, but there was a chill in the air that didn't come from the weather. I remember the interpreter. They weren't local, but had worked in the region before. He gave us all a warning, something that didn't quite fit. "The land holds things," he said, eyes flicking nervously between us. "Things that shouldn't be disturbed." We all laughed it off as superstition, but there was an edge to his voice that didn't sit right with me. And then there was the map. The grid coordinates we were given, they didn't match up with the satellite images. It was like they had intentionally left something out. No one said anything about it, but everyone noticed. It didn't matter at the time. We were soldiers after all. We followed orders. But I can tell you this now, that was the first time I felt like something wasn't right. But that was only the beginning. The convoy left the base early in the morning, the cold slicing through the air as we rolled out. Our vehicles, armored and heavy, kicked up the Siberian snow as we rumbled toward the coordinates. There were 6 of us in the convoy, including the lead truck, a few Humvees packed with our gear, and a supply truck in the rear. The radio chatter was light, mostly small talk, keeping the mood casual, the way it always was before a mission. The cold, while brutal, was just another obstacle. We were trained for it. We were professionals. And in the back of my mind, I told myself it would be a routine mission, nothing special. A few miles into the journey, the banter started. It's strange how soldiers can laugh and joke in the face of something so godforsaken. One of the men, Sergeant Morozov, cracked a joke about how the cold was the least of our problems. Out here, the real danger's the bears. And the vodka, he laughed. We all chuckled. The routine mission chatter helped ease the tension, like it always did. It was the same every time. Talk about home. Talk about the last time we got leave. Make a joke about the food back at base. For a while it felt normal, like it was just another patrol in another desolate place. But even as we laughed, there was something in the air. It didn't have a name, not at first. The village we passed through, if you could even call it that, was quiet, unnervingly so. I've been in isolated places before, but this, it felt off. No dogs barking, no children playing in the streets, no sounds of people talking. The village, a scattering of weathered homes and half-frozen structures, was as still as the grave. It was like the place had been forgotten by time. The few people we saw didn't make eye contact. They just watched us as we passed, their faces stone cold, expressionless. Not a word spoken. It was unnerving, but you push those feelings down. You don't show fear. You don't show weakness. At one point, I caught myself looking over at the supply truck in the rearview mirror. The road stretched out behind us like a white, endless sea, but something caught my eye, movement in the snow, something large darting between the trees. It wasn't an animal, not at the speed it moved. I shook it off. It was probably just a trick of the wind or the shadows, maybe an animal that got too close to the trucks, spooked by the sound. But as we continued down the road, things didn't settle. The unease crept in slowly, like a fog rolling over you. I noticed it in the way the convoy began to feel too quiet. Our radios went silent for minutes at a time. The dead air was broken only by the soft crackle of static. The tech on my rifle started acting up, and I fiddled with it, trying to get a clearer signal. Nothing. Not even a faint hum. I did a quick check of the GPS, it was fine, but that nagging feeling didn't go away. As we neared the outskirts of the battalion's last known location, things only grew stranger. The snow, which had been a constant on the journey, now seemed more oppressive. It pressed in around us like the walls of a tomb, heavy and suffocating. We finally passed a marker, the last sign of human presence before we would reach the site itself, a weathered signpost, cracked and nearly buried in snow. "Welcome to hell," Morozov muttered under his breath, an attempt at humor that fell flat in the thickening air. There were no signs of life anymore. No movement in the distance, no animals, not even the occasional bird call. Just an eerie, crushing silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I glanced at the others. Everyone had their eyes scanning the terrain. Nobody spoke. But that silence, it wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a weight. The air felt thick with it. We came across a few abandoned houses along the way, remnants of a past life. Some of the buildings were half collapsed, their windows shattered. But there was something strange. The snow around them was untouched, no tracks, no sign of animal activity. We even stopped to check one of the buildings, a small shack. There was nothing inside but dust and broken furniture. Still, the silence was deafening. Even the radio stayed quiet. When we reached the outskirts of the battalion's outpost, I felt the weight of it. Something had changed. There were no signs of life in the area. No military vehicles, no guard posts, no sentries. Just empty snow and cold, stretching out into the horizon. It was like they had been swallowed whole. We parked the convoy a distance away, each of us stepping out of the vehicles, rifles at the ready. The snow crunched underfoot, but it felt wrong. There should have been something, anything. But there was nothing. No signs of recent activity. The village we had passed through seemed more alive in comparison. Then, off to the left, I saw it. The first sign of something out of place. A line of tracks leading into the forest. The footprints were strange. Not human, not animal, a mixture of both. They looked almost too precise, like someone or something was trying to hide its tracks. The ground was too frozen to leave clear marks, but there they were, faint and insistent. That's when we reached the site and everything changed. As we moved deeper into the area, the unsettling feeling grew heavier. At first, it was just the silence, more complete than any quiet ID ever known. No distant echoes of wildlife, no wind rustling through the trees, just a dead, suffocating quiet. But that was only the start. The first thing I noticed was the footprints. We had seen them earlier, leading into the forest, and we decided to follow them. I figured they'd be nothing more than the tracks of the missing battalion, or maybe just some wildlife. But as we pressed on, they didn't make sense. The footprints were uneven, spaced erratically, like whoever or whatever had left them had no clear purpose or direction. Some prints were deep, as if something heavy had been dragging through the snow, while others barely left a mark. It was like someone, or something, had been walking in fits and starts, disoriented or wounded. I radioed back to the rest of the team, but my comms were crackling. It was like someone was jamming the signal, or the equipment was being interfered with. I couldn't get a clear read on anyone, and it was starting to get frustrating. "Morozov, can you hear me?" I called out over the static. But all I got in return was the faintest hint of his voice before it faded completely. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, in the middle of nowhere with no backup, and now I couldn't even communicate properly with my own men. The uncertainty was clawing at me. Then the smell hit. At first, I thought it was the usual stench of decay that comes with an abandoned site, the smell of rotting wood and cold earth. But this was different, unnatural. It was sharp, like burning metal mixed with something sour, something I couldn't place. It felt like the air itself was polluted with something that didn't belong there. It cut through the cold and made my stomach churn. The further we moved in, the more off everything felt. Our footsteps left strange marks in the snow, like something was trying to pull us off the path. My boots kept slipping, as if the ground was slightly unstable. But it wasn't the snow. It was the earth beneath it. It felt like something was shifting beneath our feet, like the very land was unsettled. We reached the old battalion outpost, or what was left of it. The buildings were in varying states of decay, walls buckling, windows shattered. But something caught my eye, a small detail I couldn't shake. On the wall of one of the shacks was an old symbol, scratched deep into the wood. I couldn't make it out at first, but when I stepped closer, it sent a chill down my spine. It was a symbol I didn't recognize, but it looked ancient. A crude, circular design with lines, radiating out from the center, almost like a sun or some kind of ritualistic mark. I knew enough to recognize it wasn't Russian. It wasn't anything I had ever seen. I couldn't help but feel a creeping dread wash over me as I stood there, staring at that symbol. It was like it was calling to me, a warning I couldn't ignore. Then I turned back to the team. They were all silent, eyes scanning the area. We all felt it, the weight of the place, the oppressive, unnatural silence, the eerie chill that was slowly sinking deeper into our bones. But that was just the beginning. It was late afternoon when the mission shifted from something we could control to something we couldn't even begin to understand. Up until that point, everything had followed the routine. Find the missing soldiers, assess the situation, report back. Simple. But the moment the first sound broke the silence, I knew we were no longer in control. It started as a faint scraping sound, like something dragging across metal. It was so quiet at first that I thought it was just the wind, maybe a branch scraping against a wall. But when the noise came again, sharper, closer, like something large was being dragged over the frozen ground, I stopped dead in my tracks. I wasn't the only one. Morozov glanced at me, his eyes narrowing in confusion. He heard it too. "Did you hear that?" I asked quietly, not wanting to break the uneasy calm that had settled over us. But Morozov didn't answer. He just stared off into the distance, scanning. The darkening horizon. We all did. No one spoke for a long while. The scraping came again, closer now. Then, out of nowhere, a shadow passed across the wall of one of the ruined buildings. A quick, fleeting shape. I froze. It wasn't a man, it was too tall, too thin, and the way it moved, it wasn't natural. There was no real form to it, just a dark shape skimming along the surface of the snow, disappearing into the tree line as if it had never been there at all. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had seen. But there was no sense to it. Not now. My heart was beating in my throat as I tried to focus on the task, but the grip of dread was already tightening around me. I reached for my radio to report the sighting, but as soon as I keyed it in, nothing. Just static, no response from anyone. The signal was dead. I tried again, but the same result, nothing but crackling white noise. The radios had been working fine up until now. My hands were shaking as I handed it over to Morozov. He tried the radio too. Same thing. "Damn it," he muttered, throwing it to the ground in frustration. Then came the real shock. The interpreter, the same one who had warned us earlier about the land, suddenly dropped to his knees. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear, staring at something behind us. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the ever-present shadows of the trees and the snow-covered ground. His breath came in shallow gasps as he pointed toward the ruins. "Do you hear them?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "They're waiting, they've always been waiting." I couldn't understand what he meant. His hands were trembling, clutching his head like he was trying to stop himself from going insane. I moved closer, ready to order him back to the convoy, but the look on his face stopped me cold. There was no rational explanation for the panic in his eyes. This wasn't fear of the cold or the unknown. It was something deeper. The others were starting to feel it too. Sergeant Morozov was already scanning the tree line, his rifle aimed at nothing in particular, while Corporal Ivanov stood frozen, staring at the ground. His breath was visible, yet it was as if he couldn't tear his gaze away from the snow in front of him. "Something's not right," Ivanov muttered, almost to himself. "We've been here too long." The tension in the air was suffocating. It was like the entire world had gone still, like the earth was holding its breath. And then the sound came again. This time it was closer, much closer. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps, dragging heavily through the snow, slowly, relentlessly. But there was no one there, and that's when everything changed. It came without warning, but it was impossible to ignore once it arrived. We were still reeling from the radio failures, the strange sound, and the sudden panic that had overtaken the interpreter. But nothing prepared us for the moment when the land itself seemed to come alive. The first sign was the air. It turned frigid, colder than it had been all day. A gust of wind kicked up, but it wasn't the normal biting cold of Siberia. It felt wrong. It cut through the fabric of our jackets, sending chills deep into our bones. The temperature plummeted in an instant. The breath in front of me turned to fog, hanging in the air like a cloud of death. I gripped my rifle tighter, eyes darting between the trees. Morozov moved ahead of me, his boots crunching through the snow as he scanned the surroundings. The sound of his movement seemed impossibly loud now, echoing in the stillness that had overtaken the forest. And then it happened. A figure stepped out from the shadow of the trees, tall, impossibly tall, and covered in what appeared to be tattered military garb. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though it was aware of our presence but didn't care. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but there was no mistaking the shape. It was a man, or at least, it had been once. The figure's posture was hunched, like it was carrying a heavy burden, yet it moved with an unsettling fluidity. There was no wind in the trees, no snow falling. Yet the figure seemed to be surrounded by a strange disturbance in the air, like it was pulling the coldness itself into its form. It was as if the land had bent to give it shape, the trees swaying away from it in unnatural ways. I lifted my rifle, instinct taking over. "Contact!" I shouted, my voice hoarse in the thick silence. But before I could pull the trigger, the thing raised its hand, slowly, almost mockingly. It wasn't a threat, not yet, but there was something in the way it moved that made my heart race. It was as if time slowed down. The figure stepped forward again, and the snow around it twisted unnaturally. Suddenly, the air was filled with the unmistakable sound of whispers, low and guttural. I couldn't make out the words, but they were like the voices of 1,000 souls, all pleading and screaming at once. Then the figure's head snapped up. There were no eyes, no face, just an empty, gaping hole where its features should have been, dark, endless, like the void itself. The darkness inside seemed to swallow all the light around it, pulling everything toward it. I staggered back, but my feet felt frozen to the ground. The others were frozen too, unable to move, paralyzed by something beyond fear. The air around the entity began to ripple, and then the ground beneath our feet cracked with an explosive force. I saw it then. Figures, soldiers, standing in the distance, but they weren't alive. They were like shadows of men, flickering in and out of existence. Their eyes were empty, faces twisted in agony, and their bodies bore the same tattered military uniforms as the one in front of us. They had been the battalion we came to find, but they had been twisted into something else. Morozov screamed and fired first, but the bullet never hit. It passed straight through the figure, as though it wasn't even there. The figure turned toward us, and in that instant, the ground beneath us began to shift. Soldiers from the battalion, the ones we thought were long gone, rose from the snow. They moved as one, like a single unified force, their eyes hollow, their movements jerky, uncoordinated, but purposeful. They swarmed toward us, not with the speed of men, but with the ferocity of something unnatural. Ivanov fired his rifle, but the bullets didn't stop them. They came at us, moving in jerks, almost glitching in and out of focus like they weren't completely part of this world. Then came the worst part, the sound, a shriek. It cut through the air like metal scraping against stone, vibrating in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was hit first. Someone gripped my arm, ice-cold fingers that sank into my flesh like the claws of a creature born from the earth itself. I could feel the unnatural chill of death in its grasp. I fought back, firing into the shadows of soldiers who weren't supposed to be there. But they didn't die. They didn't even bleed. They just kept coming, and I couldn't move fast enough. Morozov fell next. His scream echoed in my ears as the soldiers dragged him down into the snow, disappearing into the earth with him. The rest of us, myself included, were backed into a corner, unable to retreat. I could hear the others shouting, but the words blurred together, drowned out by the sounds of battle and the whispers of the dead. And then it all stopped. The figures were gone. The snow returned to stillness, but the taste of ice lingered in my mouth, and the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The ground where we had stood was completely undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. There was no sign of the soldiers or the entity, nothing left behind but the silence. And that's when everything changed. We didn't hesitate. The moment the figures disappeared, the only thing on my mind was getting out of there. There was no more thinking, no more strategy, just pure survival instinct. I shouted for the squad to move, but the moment I turned, I felt it, a sudden weight pressing down on me. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe. Every inch of my body screamed to run, but the others were frozen in place, staring at the empty ground, the silence suffocating. Morozov's body wasn't where he'd fallen, and that only added to the panic. I shouted again, but no one responded. The firefight started without warning. Gunshots rang out, but not from us. The soldiers, the ones who shouldn't have been alive, had reappeared, emerging from the shadows as we tried to break formation. The crack of rifles filled the air, but our bullets couldn't touch them. We were firing blindly, retreating slowly, trying to keep the others in sight. But then, just as quickly as it had started, everything stopped. The figures vanished. The gunfire ceased. And there we were, alone in the silence, still reeling, unable to grasp what had just happened. We staggered back to the convoy, breathless, injured. My arm was torn open, but that was nothing compared to the mental toll. I couldn't think straight. The others were the same. No one spoke as we drove away, eyes wide, staring into the snow like they were waiting for something to jump out at us. Command didn't believe us when we reported what happened. The incident was classified and sealed off. No official records, no investigation. They chalked it up to enemy combatants or a tactical error. But there was something more. Something they didn't want us talking about. But what happened next took things to another level. I've said more than I should have. Maybe too much. But if this video disappears, you'll know why. You think you understand what fear is until you face something that doesn't belong in this world. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, waiting, watching. It's not the cold that will kill you in Siberia, and it's not the weather that will break you. There are things buried out there. Things that weren't meant to be found. And some doors should have stayed closed. If you ever find yourself in those woods, just know this: you're not alone. And some things just don't die.